To learn from and to grow. Dealing with emotions to create decisions that it shows. I need a lesson. I need a lesson. I need a lesson. Lessons learned. Everyone has a lesson. Whether it's good or bad, you can learn from it. Thank you so much for listening to Lessons Learned. This episode is special for me because it's the end of Black History Month, and it's a good way to learn back in the past and learn from our ancestors. Of course, Black History Month isn't only a month. It's celebrated every day of the year. Next, meet AJ, a great friend I met during college, talking about an inspirational African American man that impacted our American history. AJ is also an audio engineer and creates podcasts that go live to the public. Hi, AJ.
Hey.
How you doing?
I am doing pretty good. How about yourself? Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on Lessons Learned. So, today's topic is about Black History Month.
Yes. I actually want to talk about George Washington Carver. He is very well known, but I know that when I was younger, at least, everyone just talked about how he was the peanut man, which means that he made peanut butter, which isn't true. He didn't make peanut butter, and I feel like people need to understand how much more he accomplished than just the whole peanut thing. He was born into slavery, and after slavery was over, he tried to attend schools, and schools wouldn't take him in and stuff, but because the first school, like the college, didn't take him in, he started conducting biological experiments and geological experiments with plants and stuff. And he was also a drawer, and he drew sketches of botanical samples and plants and stuff. But this helped him greatly in his pursuit of science in terms of plants and agriculture. So what he really was, he was a botanist for the rest of his remaining career. He not only helped the agriculture of America through just the use of, soil and peanuts and stuff, he also introduced different ways to help farmers get more plants and more crops grown, especially during times where trying to grow crops on soil back then was really difficult, so that we had the bugs that were there or because it's bad soil. He was able to introduce different processes that helped crops to grow bigger and better than they were before. So I thought it was really cool. It included like crop rotation, the development of alternative cash crops with cotton and stuff. Actually, one example was like there was a devastation of the boll weevil. I don't know if you know what that is, but boll weevils are basically, beetles, and they were destroying a bunch of crops. But his research helped with that, and that it helps to give more of the plant more crops and everything. It helped to stabilize a lot of people's lives. Many people that used to be former slaves that worked their own fields and stuff. And all his efforts and everything were being used even all the way up to President Theodore Roosevelt. So he was admired for his work. He sought him on agricultural advice sometimes. And he even had a mobile classroom. I know people know most about this. It was called I don't want to pronounce this wrong, but I think it was the soup wagon. And he would go to different farmers and teach them how to grow their crops properly.
Wow, I didn't know that.
A lot of cool stuff, yeah. And even better than that, he sometimes advised Gandhi on his dietary habits.
Really?
Which people didn't know about that either. So, whenever you hear about him talking, like saying that, hey, he created peanut butter, not true, but he did help to grow peanuts more efficiently, as well as other crops, cotton and all the other stuff that farmers really needed at that time. He was also the first African American to have his own national monument.
Get it?
It is amazing. But yeah, he did so much work, and this is a very small synopsis of who the man was. But he was incredible. He I think one of the cool things I like about him is that even though he was so well known and famous around him at that time, he never really stood in the spotlight like that. He always really stayed back and focused on his work more or less.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't really in like the public view teaching people things. He would really go to places one at a time, like to different schools one at a time, to different different farmers themselves, just to teach them these things. Basically, he was always in the pursuit of knowledge, and I really admire that.
Yeah, he's always trying to find something to learn from. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, AJ, for being on Lessons Learned.
Thank you very much.
Meet Eddie Polk, teacher at East Longmeadow for his 24th year. Originally from Fitchburg, Massachusetts, he was always interested in his African roots and creating cultural awareness.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Polk. Thank you so much for being on Lessons Learned.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So today's topic is about Black history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, for me as a teacher, Black history has always been very important. I come from a family, mixed race heritage. My father's Black, my mother's white. Most of my time was spent with the Black side of my family. So to me, I had a lot of experiences in terms of trying to learn about my place in society, dealing with lots of issues. And what I found in growing up, going to school, I didn't learn a lot about Black culture, Black history. And so that was something that was always important to me to consider when I went on to become an educator. So, yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So do you have any stories today about Black history, or why did you start your Black history class, African American class?
So it goes all the way back to when I was in high school. We didn't do anything to really acknowledge Black History Month. So myself and a couple other students started small, which is, kind of morning announcements, moments in Black history, just raising awareness to some of the people's stories who aren't told in our history books. And we would do a display, and it kind of started in that way in high school. Then I went back and I substitute taught at that same school that I graduated from, and my brother was there at the time, and the two of us actually ran Black History Month events. So for me, it goes all the way back to my time in high school.
That's great.
And then, of course, in college, going on to study history, I was always interested in not just Black history, but the history of people who their stories aren't told in the curriculums. So I took women's history classes, I took Asian studies classes, I took anything I could to help educate me and raise awareness for the things that were glossed over in our traditional curriculums. So when I came here to East Longmeadow High School, one of the things that I always had on my mind when I started was to start a course, a Black Studies course or African American Studies course. And it was very busy in the beginning. I was coaching back then, so I didn't do it right away, but it was something that I always had in the back of my mind. Being a Black teacher at the school, it allowed me to already have these affinity spaces with students who did not necessarily see representation in the front of the classroom. And so we had the, small get-togethers and discussions and groups and that sort of thing, but it wasn't enough. So eventually, a few years into my career here, I began to put together a curriculum for the African American Studies course, which we call AFAM Studies. And now we call AFAM Studies, or AFAM Studies Equity and Justice. So we really are talking about a broad range of marginalized experiences in American history. So we started the course, I want to say 9 years ago now. And in conjunction with the course, we started a multicultural club. And so this was a way for us to be able to not just talk about Black history and Black culture and Black experiences during the month of February, during Black History Month, but to do it in addition to, so that's a year-round topic. We still hold events and recognize Black achievements during Black History Month, but at least now with this class that I teach in both semesters, it's a place where we can have these conversations and kind of teach a history in a less of a whitewashed viewpoint year-round. So the curriculum was deliberately designed to not just be a re-examination of the things that always get talked about in history classes, such as slavery or just civil rights, and those things are important, and we do talk about them, but we talk about it talk about them through a different lens and the things that get ignored. But it's also about the experiences of people of color in Hollywood, in music, in the arts, right? It's also about the present conversations about race in our society. It's about politics. It's about economics, right? So we really jump around in the curriculum. We don't necessarily go in a chronological way. What we do is we pose the thesis. Here's where we are today. And now we go back and we kind of explore that journey to determine how we got where we are.
That's great. You just go really more in depth in everything.
Yes, for sure. But one of the things we still do is we still observe Black History Month. It's very important. And in Women's History Month, I organize that as well. And over the years, we've observed other awareness months, Native American Heritage Month, Students with Disabilities Month, and try to partner up with other groups and individuals who have interests in really raising awareness to those things. One of the things I try to do when we begin Black History Month is I try to raise awareness to the lessons of Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson is considered the founder or the father of Black studies or Black history. That doesn't mean he invented Black history, right? We have a history that goes far and long, right? But what he did with other people in his time was to begin to organize the focus of Black studies in colleges and universities. Because what Carter G. Woodson and others saw was that those histories were not told in college curriculums, much in the same way I looked at it in high school. So he was dedicated to helping people fully understand how the omission of Black history and the suppression of the contributions of Black people and people of color in general made it easier to do one very dangerous thing: preserve a psychology about race. And it reinforced the authority to preserve segregation, disenfranchisement, oppression, and helping to maintain the institutional racism that we still see today. So I think it's very important to bring awareness to that. Also, he is the person that established what was then called Negro History Week as a point in time to take a moment to acknowledge the things that we don't pay attention to. He never meant for it to be just learning about Black history in 1 week. That was never the point. The point was to raise awareness of what we should be thinking about all year. Now, he chose Negro History Week in the month of February because it dramatically affected the lives of two people that he saw as heroes during that week. One person was Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, to him, was the symbol of determination, whose birthday was on February 14th. And the other person was President Lincoln, who is seen as the great emancipator. There's complexity there, but there certainly was progress with the signature of the Emancipation Proclamation, and he was born on February 12th. So in the original Negro History Week, it was during that week of those two birthdays. I bring that up because I always hear people come to me and say, well, Mr. Polk, why is Black History Month just 1 month out of the year? Why is it the shortest month out of the year, right? And I try to get people to understand that, well, one, it was never meant to be celebrated as just 1 month, and two, it was actually very deliberate to choose that month because Carter G. Woodson looked up to these two figures. And then, of course, it expanded to Black History Month. And in 1976, the bicentennial year of the country, Gerald Ford, President Ford at the time, signed legislation to acknowledge it as Black History Month. And he was quoted as saying, "We can seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history during this month." So even President Ford in 1976 understood the importance of Black History Month and what its purpose was. It was never meant to restrict learning of Black history to 1 month. It was created simply as a way to collectively wake up our consciousness to the fact that Black history is part of American history, and it should be appreciated all year long. So when we have the morning announcements this year, for the first time, I have always had students read the announcements, but there were teachers that were interested in reading. So this month, I sent out an email on Sunday to everybody who's going to be reading that week, and we've had teachers from all around the building participate, and students still participating in the reading of the moments in Black history. And at the end of it, every since we started this process, even when you were here at this school, we ended it with, remember, Black history is American history. Yes. And we think that's very important.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. Polk. I do have one question though. Would you say that the students here at East Long Meadow High School has more awareness in Black history, women history?
That's a great question, because there are a lot of things changing even since the time you graduated, right? I would say that we've always had students who had greater awareness and elevated consciousness, as I like to say. There's actually a new women's empowerment club that started this year. A student started it, and one of our English teachers, Mrs. Goggins, is the advisor to that club. And that was always the idea with starting the Multicultural Club, that other people may start organizations in focus areas. We now have a social justice club. We have equity ambassadors, students that work with the NCCJ. We have a district diversity committee where there's student, parent, administrative, teacher representation on it. So there definitely is an elevated consciousness among some, but I think the overall general lack of understanding is still very prevalent. And that's a problem that we are working on, and it's not even a problem that's exclusive to East Long Meadow, right? It's definitely across the country. It's communities having these conversations everywhere and trying to put actions in place to be able to address some of these areas of need and disparities, especially. I would add to that that the demographics of East Long Meadow are changing quite rapidly, and I think that's a great thing. Because diversity is a wonderful thing to have, and it is an important tool in terms of creating greater understanding between people. Definitely. However, you need to be able to have systems in place that are ready to allow that diversity to flourish and prosper, and provide ways and structures and systems to engage in conversations, including in an inclusive way with that diversity. So I just checked the demographic data last night, actually, for another meeting I had. And for a number of years, the fastest growing demographic in East Long Meadow was the Asian American population, which is now at 6.2%. When I first started teaching here, it was below 0, it was 0.2. And so that increased exponentially. But this year, the Latinx population surpassed the Asian American population, which is over 7%.
Wow.
So those two demographics are growing. We also have a growing number of first-generation African immigrants that are moving to East Long Meadow. So we talk about the heterogeneity of Black America, right? It's not just, people that are descendants of enslaved people in this country. It's people, immigrants coming into the country from Nigeria, from other African nations. And we have students here from those countries, but you also have more African Americans whose families historically have been here in the country also moving into town. When I first started teaching here, the white population of East Long Meadow was 97%. It is now 82%.
Wow, that's a big jump.
That's a big change.
Even when I was in high school, there was a lot of
That's right.
There wasn't a lot of minorities. Let's just say that.
Which makes and you live the struggle of navigating spaces in predominantly white populations, and not to say that there are a lot of white allies that are very understanding and get it, but there are a lot of people that don't, and there are people who don't mean any harm, but their own implicit biases, their confirmation bias, their blind spot biasness, gets in the way of them truly understanding, and it can be very difficult for a student of color to navigate a space like that. Exactly. So I see it as an asset only if we prepare for it to be an asset. If we don't have these conversations, if we don't recognize and raise awareness to other cultures and marginalized groups, you can have very toxic environments that can be harmful.
Definitely.
So,
thank you so much, Mr. Polk.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was a great conversation. It's always great to see you as well.
You too.
Congratulations.
Thank you again for listening to Lessons Learned. See you next week. Oh, and remember, Black history is American history.